As a ranger, Peter is used to seeing predators in the area he works in. When he got the report, a black bear was roaming around. He had to investigate. As he was walking around, he saw something moving in the distance, and he knew he had to approach carefully. When he did, something extraordinary caught his attention. The black bear was carrying a baby, and the blood drained from Peter's face. In his entire career, Peter had never seen anything like this. The situation became even more concerning when the bear refused to let go of the child. There were a lot of questions and concerns on Peter's mind, but he had to focus. He decided to take a slow approach because if the bear got angry, the child could get seriously hurt. Peter slowly approached the bear from behind, and the animal had just placed the boy on the ground. That could have been Peter's chance to get the child to safety, but just as he was assessing his chances, the bear turned around. At first, Peter thought the bear hadn't noticed him, but then he saw its attitude change. That was not good at all, and he had never been so afraid. Thanks to his experience as a ranger, Peter knew not to make any sudden movements. He had to remain completely still, or it could be the end of him. Then, the bear reacted. It grabbed the child instead of pouncing on Peter and quickly ran away. Peter tried to see where it was going, but it was too fast. He had to inform his fellow rangers and ask for a rescue team to be sent in. However, there was a problem. His fellow rangers didn't believe Peter at all. He insisted he had seen the bear with the child, but they just didn't buy it. Peter was determined to help, so he knew he had to take matters into his own hands. The next best option was to call the police, and that's what he did. He told them what was going on, and the police officers arrived right away. The police took Peter's call very seriously, and when they arrived, Peter's boss asked the officers to go into his office. When they came out, they ignored Peter and went straight into the forest. More police officers arrived, and they told Peter not to move. They seemed angry, and he had no idea why. After a few minutes, the officers that went into the forest returned, and they started questioning Peter. Peter was questioned about the bear he had supposedly seen, and he was also asked about the child. It seemed like the police weren't taking his story as seriously as before, but he knew what he had seen, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it. The police told Peter they didn't think it was funny, as if they thought he was lying and they would be leaving soon. Peter was so frustrated by the situation, he burst into tears. Peter had been forbidden to leave the office, but his boss still wanted to talk to him. Unfortunately, Peter's boss suspended him and told him he could no longer work as a ranger. He felt like the world was against him and that he was seeing things. It turns out that Peter had gone through some traumatic things. He and his wife had just lost a baby, so that's why they thought he was imagining the bear and the child. Peter knew what he saw, and he was determined to find out the truth. He was no longer allowed to enter the forest, but he didn't care. The welfare of the child was the only thing on his mind. His wife tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen, and he went into the forest anyway. Peter decided to go early in the morning because he knew no one would be paying attention to the edge of the forest. He just had to do one more thing before he left. Before we get into that, please give this video a like to help it reach 7K likes and subscribe to the channel. Before heading out, Peter went to see his best friend Jacob, a fellow ranger. Jacob was surprised to see Peter because he had already heard what happened. Peter explained everything to him and asked him to accompany him to the forest to help him save the boy. Jacob was reluctant at first, but he had never seen Peter in such a state, and he felt he had no choice but to help his friend. Plus, he didn't want Peter to get hurt. As they got there and went deeper into the forest, Peter kept talking about the boy and the bear. Jacob couldn't help but think that Peter had become completely delusional, and he felt the urge to call someone for help, but something prevented him from doing so. When they finally reached the place where Peter had seen the bear, Jacob noticed something. There were tracks on the ground, and he was immediately intrigued. He had heard of bears in the area, but the tracks were bigger than normal. They looked like black bear tracks, so Jacob started to believe that Peter had at least seen a black bear. He still wasn't sure about the child, but he started to think his friend was onto something. Now, black bears are nothing to joke about, and if the animal was keeping a human child with him, who knows what it was capable of doing? Jacob let Peter know about the tracks and they started following the trail, but they soon lost track. They had no idea where the bear might be, and it was as if the animal had vanished into thin air. Peter was growing desperate, and then something happened. Out of nowhere, they heard a roar and they froze because it sounded very close. Peter was now sure that they were in the bear's territory and the animal had probably smelled the two men. They had to be very careful now. Peter started to walk toward the noise, but Jacob pulled him back. Jacob was terrified and he didn't want to go near the bear, but Peter was determined. Meanwhile, it sounded like the bear was getting closer and Peter had no intention of backing down. Peter finally convinced Jacob to stay close to him because that would help their chances. Jacob reluctantly followed Peter, who was determined to go in, snatch the child, and run. As they walked closer to where the sound had come from, they noticed a cave, and the bear's tracks went straight into it. Peter tried to move forward slowly. Then, suddenly, he froze. He could see the bear, and he was now more terrified than before. This situation was outside of his comfort zone, and he knew deep down that they shouldn't be there, but there was a child on the line. Now, they couldn't see the child, and Peter was determined to locate the boy. Then they heard a noise. There was crying coming from the cave. The bear reacted to it and went back into the cave. A few moments later, he came out and the crying had stopped. It was now clear that the child was inside the cave. Then the bear came back out, and this time it turned its head toward Jacob. Peter reminded him to stay still, but Peter was so scared that instinctively he started to walk back. Big mistake! The bear reacted and started charging towards Jacob. Peter tried to distract the bear, but the animal only seemed interested in Jacob. Jacob had no choice but to get away from there as quickly as possible, so he started running. At one point, he stumbled, but he immediately got to his feet and managed to climb a tree. The bear tried to pull him down, but it couldn't reach him. Peter knew this was his chance. There was a clear path to the cave, and he felt Jacob was okay, so he started walking toward the cave. But then, Jacob started yelling that the bear was going in Peter's direction. There was no time to waste, so Peter started running towards the cave entrance. When Peter reached the cave, it was pitch black inside. He quickly pulled his phone out of his pocket to use the flashlight, but he didn't know where to go. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from the bottom of the cave. He walked toward the noise, and then he saw something that shocked him to his core. The child was there. At first glance, the boy seemed unharmed, but they had to get out quickly. The bear was already entering the cave, so Peter turned off the flashlight. For a moment, he thought the bear wouldn't notice them, but then the child started to cry. Peter turned the flashlight back on and looked the bear straight in the face. He was cornered, holding the baby in his arms. Suddenly, he heard a noise, and the bear started to fall asleep. He had been hit with a sedative. It turns out Jacob had called the rangers right before they entered the forest because he just wanted to take precautions. That was a great decision. Unfortunately, the whole ordeal wasn't over yet. They still had no idea where the child's parents were, so they decided to take the boy to the nearest hospital and call the police. The boy was checked at the hospital and Peter refused to let him out of his sight. Doctors ran some tests not only to check the child's health, but also to find out who his parents were. After a while, the doctors determined the child was healthy. Peter also got news from the bear. The animal was left in the forest, so it was also safe. Eventually, one of the police officers gave Peter the answers he was waiting for. It turns out they determined that the bear was helping the child. His parents had been involved in a fatal car accident near the forest, and it was believed that the bear found the child and took care of it. Peter's wife ran to the hospital to be with her husband as they waited to hear about the boy, so when he got the news, they both looked at each other and knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to adopt the boy. They felt that fate had brought Peter to the child that day, and he had already connected with the boy through the entire ordeal. After some time, they finalized the adoption process, and Peter also got his job back. It goes to show that when you fight for what's right, even if everyone thinks you're crazy, good things will happen. Can you believe how this story unfolded? Let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. See you next time.